Dear men, let's get something straight from the beginning. Your worth is not defined by how well you cater to a woman's every desire. Somewhere along the way, society began praising men not for who they are, but for how well they perform, how much they provide, how often they say yes, when they really mean no. And slowly, almost quietly, masculinity began to fade, not because men weren't strong enough, but because they started abandoning themselves in an effort to gain approval. From the time you were a little boy, the world began sending subtle messages. Be nice, don't argue, always say yes, and if a girl likes you, you must be doing something right. The idea of being a good boy quickly became intertwined with gaining approval, not just from parents or teachers, but eventually from women. And so, without even realizing it, you were trained to seek acceptance by molding yourself into what others wanted. But here's the truth that many men discover only after years of frustration and inner conflict. You were not born to be a puppet. You were not placed on this earth to perform, to bend, to comply, or to sacrifice your core just so someone else will clap for you. The more you try to become what you think women want, the more you lose the man you truly are. Because when you edit yourself for approval, you're not building a connection, you're building a mask, and the more masks you wear, the harder it becomes to even recognize your own reflection. You start confusing politeness for goodness, submission for kindness, and silence for strength. But those are not the qualities of a grounded man. A grounded man doesn't look to others for a sense of direction. He listens to his inner compass, he leads himself, he honors his truth, he values his opinions even when they're unpopular. Yet, in today's culture, this kind of man is becoming rare, not because men are weak, but because they've been taught to seek safety in pleasing others. But safety is not fulfillment, it's not freedom. It's a slow erosion of the fire that makes you feel alive, and you start noticing it. Not in obvious ways, but in quiet moments of discontent. You go on dates and feel like you're auditioning. You stay in conversations where you're not being heard. You find yourself nodding to things you disagree with, laughing at jokes that don't amuse you, agreeing just to avoid conflict, all because somewhere deep down, you believe that if you please her, she'll stay. If you please her, she'll love you. If you please her, you'll be chosen. But real love doesn't ask you to abandon yourself. It doesn't require you to trade in your values, your standards, or your voice. The man who's always agreeable becomes invisible. He blends in. He becomes forgettable, not because he's not worthy, but because he's no longer distinct. He's replaced his masculine edge with emotional obedience. And when you do that, when you choose to become someone's idea of perfect, you rob yourself of the richness that comes from being seen for who you really are, not the polished version, not the filtered version. But the man who stands for something, the man who can walk away when he's disrespected, the man who can say no without guilt, that kind of man doesn't chase approval. He embodies truth, and it's in that truth that real attraction is born. Not from your willingness to please, but from your unwillingness to betray yourself for it. Because no woman, no matter how beautiful, is worth the price of your authenticity. And every time you choose to perform instead of express, you silence a piece of your own masculine energy. This energy, this core of who you are, was never meant to be bent into shape. It was meant to stand tall, to be rooted, to be unshaken. The longer you try to please, the further you drift from your own identity. And the more approval you seek, the more lost you become in the process of getting it. The way back isn't through trying harder to be what she wants. It's through remembering who you are when no one is watching, when no one is asking anything of you, when you're not trying to impress anyone at all. That's where the real man lives. That's where your power has been waiting. Masculinity is not the enemy, but somehow the world has convinced you it is. The word itself has been dragged through the mud, labeled toxic, aggressive, outdated, as if being masculine is inherently wrong. But let's stop right there and set the record straight. Masculinity in its true form is not about domination, control, or silence. It's about presence, direction, strength, and a deeply rooted sense of self. The real toxicity doesn't come from masculinity. It comes from the pressure to submit in order to be accepted. It comes from the growing belief that to be lovable, a man must dull his edge, lower his voice, soften his stance, and shrink into something more digestible. You weren't created to be digestible. You weren't built to water yourself down in order to fit into someone else's idea of what's acceptable. When a man gives up his voice, when he constantly submits to opinions and expectations that don't reflect his own, he's not being kind. He's abandoning himself. That's not strength. That's survival mode. That's what happens when a man starts believing that his masculinity is a liability rather than a gift. But the truth is, the world needs masculine men now more than ever. Men who are rooted, not reactive. Men who move with quiet confidence, not desperation. Men who can love without losing themselves in the process. And yet so many men are walking around on eggshells, afraid to offend, afraid to assert, afraid to be themselves. You see it in the way they date, always waiting for cues, always checking if they've said the right thing, always holding back their true opinions just to keep the peace. But peace that comes from self, silencing, is not peace, it's paralysis. And no woman respects a man who constantly folds. You were not meant to live bent. You were meant to take up space, not in arrogance, but in certainty. When you abandon your masculine energy to appease or pacify, you strip yourself of the very thing that makes you a stabilizing force. Masculinity is the container, the grounded presence that says, I know who I am and I don't need to prove it. It's the ability to protect, provide, not just materially, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It's the capacity to lead, not dominate, to hold space, not disappear into it. But when masculinity is demonized, when it's twisted into something shameful, men begin to hide their natural instincts. They become passive, indecisive, unclear. They ask for permission to be themselves instead of standing confidently in who they are. This creates confusion in relationships because no one feels safe when the masculine presence is absent. Women feel like they must lead, guide, direct, correct. And that's not attraction, that's exhaustion. A woman cannot fully trust a man who doesn't trust himself. She cannot surrender to a man who constantly surrenders his power to her. And so the polarity that sparks real connection begins to disappear. What's left is resentment, frustration, disconnection, not because men are inherently broken, but because they are disconnected from their own masculine core. They've been told that submission will earn them love, that pleasing will keep them close, that compliance is the way to a woman's heart. But deep down they feel it, that quiet discomfort, that inner dullness, that lingering question of why they still don't feel respected, still don't feel desired, even when they've done everything right. Doing everything right at the cost of your masculinity will never give you the love you crave, because the love you want cannot be built on self-sacrifice. It must be built on mutual respect. And respect starts with you respecting yourself enough to stop apologizing for your masculine nature, enough to stop softening who you are just to avoid being misunderstood, enough to stop submitting in places where you were meant to lead. Masculinity isn't toxic losing, it is. There's a silent trap that too many men fall into, and it's one that feels deceptively innocent at first. You think you're just being kind, thoughtful, loving, supportive. You believe that going the extra mile, constantly checking in, always agreeing, making yourself available, and putting her needs above your own will make you more valuable in her eyes, but what you're really doing is handing over your power 1 inch at a time. And the worst part is, you don't even realize it's happening. Validation chasing is subtle, and it's disguised as care. It looks like texting back instantly, even when you're busy. It sounds like saying sure, when everything inside you wants to say no. It feels like canceling your plans just to accommodate hers, even if she wouldn't do the same for you. And it all comes from one deeply rooted belief, that her attention defines your worth, that her approval makes you significant, that being chosen by her means you finally matter. But if your confidence rises and falls depending on whether she likes your post, responds to your message, or gives you a compliment, then what you have isn't self-esteem, it's dependence. That kind of emotional dependency doesn't just weaken your masculinity, it drains your identity. Because when you start living for her validation, you stop living for yourself. You're no longer making choices based on what's true for you. You're making choices based on what will please her, what will keep her close, what will earn you a few more points in the game of attraction. But love isn't a game, and when you play it like one, you end up becoming a player in someone else's narrative, constantly guessing, constantly reacting, constantly wondering if you're doing enough. And here's the brutal truth: women can sense when a man is performing. They can feel it when you're acting out of fear of rejection, when you're putting on a show to be liked, when you're not leading with your truth, but tiptoeing around theirs. And while they may enjoy the attention for a while, they don't respect the man behind it. They don't feel drawn to a man who constantly puts them on a pedestal, because pedestal love isn't real love. It's obsession, and obsession, unlike grounded desire, is never attractive. You become needy, not noble. Desperate, not desirable, and eventually, no matter how much you try to give, it will never be enough. Not because you're not enough, but because you're giving from emptiness, not from overflow. When you're rooted in your purpose, your decisions aren't dictated by whether someone else approves. You don't need constant reassurance. You don't get shaken by delayed replies or subtle rejections. You stand firm because your validation doesn't come from the outside. It flows from within. A man who knows who he is doesn't chase. He attracts, he doesn't convince. He commands presence. He doesn't beg for affection. He radiates a confidence that draws people in without needing to force anything. But that version of you can't exist if you keep looking outward for proof that you matter. He can't rise if you keep bending, pleasing, molding, adjusting, apologizing. You have to choose to validate yourself before anyone else does. You have to stop asking for permission to be powerful, because the moment you begin to believe that you are enough without applause, you stop performing. And when the performance ends, real connection begins, not the kind built on pretending, not the kind held together by fear, but the kind grounded in mutual respect and unshakable self-worth. You've been told that the way to a woman's heart is through pleasing her, impressing her, proving yourself to her at every turn. But let's pause for a moment and ask, has that truly worked for you? Has bending over backward to meet every unspoken expectation brought you peace? Has it earned you the kind of respect you crave? Or has it left you feeling like you're always one step behind, always performing, always trying to become someone who is finally enough? In her eyes, the truth is women are not drawn to a man who tries too hard to be liked. They are drawn to a man who is driven by something deeper than the need for attention, a man who has direction, a man who moves with purpose, a man whose life is already full and aligned before she ever enters it. Because you see, a man with purpose is rare. He doesn't need to impress because he already knows his worth. He's not constantly checking his phone hoping for a response. He's not anxiously wondering if she's lost interest because he's not basing his identity on whether or not she chooses him. His focus is not on being chosen, it's on choosing the life he wants, the mission he's committed to, the legacy he wants to build, and in doing so, he becomes magnetic, not by force, but by presence. Women may be attracted to looks or charm in the beginning, but what holds their attention is feeling of safety, clarity, and direction that comes from a man who knows where he's going, a man who is not seeking validation but living from his vision. And yet so many men have reversed the order. They drop everything the moment a woman shows interest. They adjust their entire schedule, compromise their priorities, delay their dreams just to be more available, more appealing, more likable, not realizing that in doing so, they dilute the very essence that makes them powerful in the first place, because when a man sacrifices his purpose for affection, he loses both. There is something undeniably attractive about a man who is not moved by every emotion, who can feel deeply but still stay grounded, who can listen and love without abandoning himself, and that comes from purpose. It doesn't come from guessing what a woman wants. It doesn't come from rehearsed lines or excessive flattery. It doesn't come from being overly agreeable or trying to fit into whatever mold you think will get you approval. It comes from the quiet confidence of knowing you are on a path that matters, that you wake up each day with clarity and commitment, that you have values you won't compromise and standards you won't lower just for temporary attention. When you lead with purpose, your energy changes, your presence deepens, your words carry weight, and you become someone who cannot be easily swayed or forgotten, because you're not just another man trying to please. You're a man who stands for something, and that is what truly draws people to you, not the image you create, not the performance you put on, but the energy of someone who lives with intention. You don't have to try so hard to be liked when you're already proud of who you are becoming. You don't have to chase when you're rooted. You don't have to prove yourself when you're already showing up powerfully in your own life. And the irony is, the moment you stop trying to impress, you become impressive, not because you're trying to be, but because you're too focused on your own journey to need anyone's approval to validate your direction. And that kind of presence is what turns heads, what earns respect, what builds lasting connection, not the endless effort to win attention, but the unwavering decision to live on purpose. No matter who notices or who doesn't. Saying yes all the time does not make you more lovable, it makes you more forgettable, because when a man says yes to everything and everyone, what he's really doing is saying no to himself. And that constant self-abandonment slowly chips away at his identity until there's nothing left but a shell that exists only to serve others. Comfort. But a man with boundaries is different. He doesn't agree to everything because he understands that not everything deserves his energy, his time, or his attention. He doesn't fear the discomfort that comes with saying no because he values his own peace more than temporary approval. And that's not arrogance, it's self-respect, it's clarity, it's knowing that his worth isn't determined by how many people he pleases, but by how deeply he honors himself. You might think that setting boundaries will make you look harsh or unkind, but the truth is, boundaries are what create safety. They are what earn respect. They are what differentiate a man who stands in his power from a man who constantly chases validation. A man who draws a line and stands by it sends a silent but clear message. I know who I am, I know what I want, and I refuse to compromise that for fleeting attention. And it is that kind of man who becomes magnetic, not because he tries to be, but because he cannot be moved by superficial demands. He is not easily swayed by emotion. He is not manipulated by guilt. He is solid, steady, grounded. Women don't admire a man who says yes to everything they want. They admire a man who says yes to what's aligned and no to what isn't. A man who refuses to tolerate disrespect just because he's afraid of being left. A man who doesn't flinch when someone challenges his stance because he's not performing. He's rooted, and in that grounded energy there is peace, there is clarity, there is direction, and most importantly, there is trust. Because how can anyone trust a man who doesn't trust himself? How can anyone feel safe with someone who avoids conflict by constantly folding? It's tempting to think that always being available, always agreeing, always accommodating will make you the perfect man, the ideal partner, the one who's easy to love. But real love is not born from ease. It is born from